You think the Crock-Pot was just for bland, mushy casseroles? Think again. These ceramic countertop revolutionaries served up some of the most practical, surprisingly delicious, and culturally transformative meals in American culinary history. They're real dishes that fed real families across suburban America from the 1970s through the 1990s. Let's dive into 25 Crock-Pot dinners from the classic slow cooker era. Chili con carne. Nothing says set it and forget it like classic Crock-Pot chili. Back in 1971, when the rival Crock-Pot hit American kitchens, chili con carne became the flagship recipe that sold millions of units. Working women finally had permission to leave the house for 8 hours without dinner guilt. You'd brown ground beef the night before, dump in kidney beans, tomatoes, chili powder and onions, then walk away for the entire workday. The extended cooking time actually improved the flavor, letting those spices marry and deepen in ways stovetop cooking couldn't match. This was the dish that proved to skeptical husbands that cooking all day didn't require anyone to actually be home. It showed up at every church potluck, office party, and football gathering throughout the 70s and 80s. Today's Instapot chili fanatics owe everything to this slow cooking pioneer. Chuck roast with root vegetables. The Sunday pot roast got a weekday makeover when the Crock-Pot turned this labor-intensive classic into a Tuesday night possibility. Before the slow cooker revolution, pot roast was weekend-only territory. But in 1975, suburban homemakers discovered they could sear a chuck roast Sunday evening, surround it with carrots, potatoes, onions, and celery. Add beef broth and a packet of Lipton's onion soup mix. Then, set the dial to low. By Monday dinner, that tough cut transformed into fork-tender perfection. The root vegetables absorbed all those beefy, oniony flavors, turning into soft, savory comfort that tasted like someone's grandmother had been cooking all day. In working-class households during the economically turbulent 70s, this dish stretched cheap meat into a feast feeding 6 people. The modern meal prep movement essentially rediscovered what Crock-Pot families knew 40 years ago. Pork chops with cream of mushroom soup. This Campbell's Soup Company darling became the unofficial mascot of semi-homemade cooking decades before Sandra Lee coined the term. In 1976, Campbell's marketing department pushed this recipe hard, recognizing the Crock-Pot as their new best friend. Busy mothers could layer pork chops in the slow cooker, dump an undiluted can of cream of mushroom soup over the top, add maybe some onions or white wine if feeling fancy, and let it bubble away for 6 hours. The soup created its own gravy, keeping those notoriously dry pork chops moist and tender. The mushroom flavor penetrated deep into the meat, while the chops released juices into the soup, creating a thick, peppery sauce that begged for mashed potatoes underneath. This was the era when using condensed soup wasn't cheating. It was smart shopping, proving you could work full-time and still serve traditional home cooking. Beef stroganoff. Fancy Russian cuisine got a Crock-Pot makeover, bringing Eastern European elegance to American subdivisions, one slow-cooked dinner at a time. Originally a 19th century Russian aristocratic dish, stroganoff migrated to American tables in the 1960s. But the Crock-Pot transformed it from special occasion splurge to weeknight regular by 1978. You'd cube stew beef, brown it in butter, then transfer it to the slow cooker with sliced mushrooms, beef broth, and plenty of onions. The magic happened over 8 hours as that tough beef broke down into tender perfection. Right before serving, you'd stir in sour cream and maybe a splash of sherry, creating that signature tangy, creamy sauce over egg noodles or rice. During the Cold War era, serving Russian food felt cosmopolitan and cultured, proving suburban homemakers could be worldly and practical simultaneously. Today's foodie culture celebrates global fusion, but Crock-Pot cooks were already there. Swedish meatballs. IKEA didn't invent America's obsession with Swedish meatballs. The Crock-Pot did, turning this Scandinavian specialty into the undisputed king of potluck appetizers. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, Swedish meatballs became ultimate party food, served from crock-pots on warm settings at every baby shower and holiday gathering. You'd mix ground beef with breadcrumbs, eggs, nutmeg, and allspice. Roll them into perfect 1-inch spheres, brown them in batches, then nestle them into the slow cooker. The sauce, beef broth, sour cream, and cream of mushroom soup would simmer around those meatballs for hours, creating impossibly rich, tangy, slightly sweet gravy. The nutmeg and allspice gave them that distinctive, exotic flavor that made guests ask for the recipe. This was ethnic cuisine for people who'd never left their home state. Sophisticated enough to feel special, familiar enough not to scare anyone. The humble slow cooker turned appetizers into all-night affairs. Swiss steak. Despite its name, this dish was pure American pragmatism, a Depression-era solution to tough meat that found its perfect home in the 1970s crock-pot. Swiss steak had nothing to do with Switzerland. The Swissing referred to tenderizing techniques that became optional with slow cooking. You'd take tough round steak, dredge it in seasoned flour, brown it hard in cast iron to develop a crust, then transfer it to the crock-pot with tomatoes, bell peppers, onions, and celery. The acidic tomatoes broke down those tough muscle fibers, while vegetables softened into thick, savory sauce. By dinner time, you could cut that steak with a fork, and the gravy was rich enough to make white rice taste luxurious. In working-class neighborhoods during the economically tight 70s and 80s, Swiss steak stretched cheap cuts into dignified dinners, proving you didn't need prime beef for restaurant-quality meals. Modern braising enthusiasts pay premium prices for results crock-pot families achieved for pocket change. Ham and bean soup. This humble soup turned leftover holiday ham bones into a second feast that tasted even better than the original meal. Every January, after Christmas left households with picked-over ham bones, the crock-pot came out for its annual bean soup ritual. You'd throw that ham bone, still clinging with glazed, smoky meat, into the slow cooker with dried navy beans, onions, carrots, celery, and bay leaves. No pre-soaking required. Extended cooking softened even the hardest beans. Over 10 to 12 hours, that bone released every last bit of flavor into the broth, creating thick, smoky, slightly sweet soup that tasted like frugality and wisdom combined. You'd fish out the bone at the end, picking off remaining meat to stir back in. This was Depression-era mentality, meeting modern convenience. Waste nothing. Stretch everything. Honor food by using every last bit. Today's zero-waste cooking movement thinks it invented resourcefulness. But crock-pot families were sustainability champions decades before it became trendy. Chicken and rice casserole. Before one-pot meals became Instagram darlings, this crock-pot classic proved complete dinners could happen in a single ceramic vessel. In the early 1980s, when microwaves were making fresh cooking seem obsolete, chicken and rice casserole fought back by offering genuinely home-cooked flavor with minimal effort. You'd layer raw chicken thighs over uncooked rice in the crock-pot, add cream of chicken soup thinned with milk or broth, throw in frozen mixed vegetables, season with poultry seasoning and garlic powder, then walk away for 6 hours. The rice absorbed chicken juices and soup, vegetables steamed perfectly, and the chicken stayed tender. Everything cooked together, flavors mingling and marrying, creating a complete meal that dirtied exactly one pot. This answered the "what's for dinner?" panic every working parent faced during the hectic 80s. You could prep it in 10 minutes before work and come home to something that smelled like you'd been cooking all day. Sloppy Joes. The loose meat sandwich got a crock-pot upgrade. transforming a stovetop splatterfest into a hands-off party pleaser, perfect for feeding crowds. Sloppy Joes originated in the 1930s Iowa, but found their true calling in the 1970s, crockpots at school fundraisers and backyard gatherings. Instead of standing over a skillet getting tomato sauce everywhere, you'd brown ground beef with onions, drain the grease, then transfer everything to the slow cooker with ketchup, brown sugar, Worcestershire sauce, yellow mustard, and vinegar. 4 to 6 hours later, the mixture thickened into that perfect sweet tangy, slightly sloppy consistency that defined childhood dinner memories. Extended cooking mellowed the sharpness, while brown sugar caramelized slightly, and beef absorbed all those bold flavors. At teen parties and church youth groups throughout the 80s, crockpots of Sloppy Joe mixture sat surrounded by hamburger buns, letting 30 kids feed themselves without supervision. This was crowd-feeding democracy in action before taco bars existed. Corned beef and cabbage. St. Patrick's Day went from once-a-year hassle to annual tradition when the Crock-Pot made this Irish-American classic achievable for average households. Before slow cookers, corned beef intimidated most home cooks. It required hours of simmering, constant water monitoring, and precise timing to avoid tough, chewy disaster. But starting in the mid-1970s, March 17th became Crock-Pot Corned Beef Day across America. You'd rinse that salt-cured brisket, place it in the slow cooker with the included spice packet, cover with water, add quartered potatoes and carrots halfway through, then wedge cabbage chunks on top during the final hour. 8 hours later, that brisket sliced like butter, vegetables soaked up all that spiced, slightly salty broth, and your house smelled like a Dublin pub. The cabbage wilted into sweet, tender submission. This dish single-handedly kept St. Patrick's Day relevant in non-Irish households, turning a religious feast day into an easy, festive dinner excuse. Meatloaf. The ultimate comfort food classic found its perfect home in the Crock-Pot, where gentle heat prevented the dry, cracked disasters that plagued oven-baked versions. Throughout the 1980s, meatloaf purists swore the Crock-Pot produced superior results to traditional baking. You'd mix ground beef with breadcrumbs, eggs, milk, ketchup, and onions, form it into a loaf shape, nestle it into the slow cooker, slather the top with brown sugar ketchup glaze, then let it cook 6 to 8 hours. The enclosed environment trapped moisture, keeping meatloaf unbelievably tender, while the bottom and sides developed slightly caramelized crust from sitting in its own juices. The glaze melted and permeated throughout, creating pockets of sweet, tangy flavor in every slice. Unlike oven meatloaf that could dry out or crack, the Crock-Pot version stayed cohesive, slicing cleanly for perfect sandwiches the next day. This was Grandma's recipe meeting modern technology, traditional flavors with updated convenience, proving slow cookers weren't just for stews. Pork and sauerkraut. This Pennsylvania Dutch New Year's tradition went mainstream when crockpots made the pungent preparation palatable for less adventurous households. In German-American communities, eating pork and sauerkraut on New Year's Day supposedly guaranteed prosperity. The pork represented progress. The kraut symbolized money. But the dish's strong flavor kept many families at arm's length until the Crock-Pot solved both problems in the late 1970s. You'd place a pork shoulder or country-style ribs in the slow cooker, dump jarred sauerkraut over the top, add apple for sweetness, maybe some caraway seeds and brown sugar, then cook low and slow for 8 hours. Extended cooking mellowed the sauerkraut's sharpness, pork fat enriched the kraut, and apple added subtle sweetness that balanced the tang. The pork emerged fall-apart tender, absorbing fermented cabbage flavor without being overwhelmed. The Crock-Pot's sealed cooking environment contained the strong kraut smell, making the dish more acceptable to sensitive neighbors and family members. Crock-Pot meatballs with grape jelly and chili sauce. This infamous recipe became the symbol of mid-century American cooking ingenuity, equal parts horrifying and delicious, impossible to explain, but unforgettable to taste. Legend says this originated in the 1950s, when a resourceful home economist needed party appetizers and grabbed what was in the pantry. By the 1970s, it became the Crock-Pot's most polarizing success story. You'd mix frozen meatballs with 1 jar of grape jelly and 1 bottle of Heinz chili sauce. Heat it in the slow cooker on low for 4 hours, and watch skeptical guests line up for seconds despite themselves. The jelly melted into the chili sauce, creating a sweet, spicy glaze that was simultaneously ketchup-like and grape-like, and completely unlike anything nature intended. The meatballs absorbed this bizarre sauce, becoming sticky, tangy, slightly sweet flavor bombs that defied logic but dominated potlucks. This was the epitome of American convenience cooking. No fresh ingredients, no cooking skills required, maximum party impact. Food snobs mocked it relentlessly while secretly eating 7, standing by the Crock-Pot. Chicken noodle soup. Campbell's made it iconic, but Crock-Pot cooks made it real, transforming a canned classic into actual homemade medicine that cured everything from colds to heartbreak. Before slow cookers, homemade chicken noodle soup required babysitting a stock pot for hours, skimming foam, monitoring heat, and hoping you didn't boil it dry. But starting in the late 1970s, busy parents discovered they could throw chicken pieces, carrots, celery, onions, and chicken broth into the crock-pot before work, letting it simmer all day. You'd come home to that unmistakable aroma of slowly cooked chicken and vegetables. The smell that means someone loves you enough to make real food. Right before dinner, you'd fish out the chicken, shred the meat, discard bones, stir in egg noodles, and let them soften 20 minutes. The broth was golden and rich, vegetables tender but not mushy, chicken falling apart at the slightest touch. This soup proved love could come from a ceramic pot on a timer. Salisbury steak. TV dinners tried to make this work, but the Crock-Pot finally delivered on the promise of tender, gravy-smothered beef patties, worthy of the name. Dr. J. H. Salisbury invented this dish in the 1890s as health food, believing minced beef could cure almost anything. By the 1980s, health claims were gone, but the Crock-Pot version remained wildly popular. You'd form seasoned ground beef into thick oval patties, brown them hard in a skillet, then arrange them in the slow cooker with sliced onions and mushrooms. The gravy, made from beef broth, tomato paste, Worcestershire sauce, and flour slurry, would pour over everything. Then, you'd cook it low for 6 hours. Those beef patties stayed incredibly moist and tender, never drying out like their oven-baked cousins. The onions and mushrooms practically dissolved into the gravy, creating thick, savory sauce that demanded mashed potatoes underneath. This was hamburger upgraded to dinner party status, proving ground beef didn't have to mean casual or boring. Pot roast with onion soup mix. Lipton's iconic recipe packet became so synonymous with crock-pot cooking that onion soup mix functioned as culinary shorthand for actually tastes good. When Lipton introduced their onion soup mix in 1952, they couldn't have predicted it would become the secret weapon of slow cooker enthusiasts 20 years later. You'd place a chuck roast in the crock-pot, sprinkle the entire packet of dehydrated onions and mysterious seasonings over the top, add potatoes and carrots around the edges, pour in some beef broth, and let chemistry happen for 8 hours. That packet contained the perfect balance of salt, sugar, onion powder, and unnamed umami boosters that transformed budget beef into something remarkable. The roast emerged fork tender, surrounded by rich brown gravy, needing no additional seasoning. The vegetables absorbed all those concentrated onion flavors, tasting like they'd been slowly caramelized for hours. This was cooking from a packet, but it was also reliable results when stakes were high, when your mother-in-law was coming, or when you needed comfort food. BBQ pulled pork. Long before food trucks made pulled pork trendy, crock-pots were turning pork shoulders into shredded barbecue perfection in suburban kitchens nationwide. True barbecue purists would scoff, but throughout the 1980s and 90s, the crock-pot brought North Carolina-style pulled pork to places that had never seen a real smoker. You'd place a bone-in pork shoulder, often called a pork butt, despite being from the shoulder, into the slow cooker. Season it with a dry rub of brown sugar, paprika, garlic powder, and cayenne. Then, let it cook on low for 10 to 12 hours. No liquid needed. The pork released enough fat and moisture to braise itself. By the time you opened that lid, the meat literally fell off the bone, shredding with 2 forks into tender, smoky sweet strands. You'd mix in bottled barbecue sauce or vinegar-based slaw, pile it on cheap white buns, and call it dinner. This dish turned weekend cookout food into weeknight possibility. Beef and barley soup. This Eastern European hearty soup became America's answer to chicken noodle, the other comfort soup that fixed everything with time and patience. Barley, largely forgotten in American cooking by the 1960s, found new life in 1970s. Crockpots when home cooks rediscovered its nutty texture and incredible ability to thicken soup. You'd cube stew beef, brown it hard for flavor, then combine it in the slow cooker with pearl barley, diced tomatoes, carrots, celery, onions, and beef broth. 8 hours later, the barley absorbed liquid and plumped up beautifully, releasing starch that thickened the soup without flour or cream. The beef broke down into tender chunks, and all those vegetables softened into sweet, savory perfection. The barley added satisfying chewiness that made every spoonful feel substantial. This was soup that stuck to your ribs, as grandmothers would say. In cold, Midwestern winters, beef and barley soup represented warmth and abundance. The soup you made when fresh vegetables were expensive, yet it tasted like harvest and plenty. Honey garlic chicken. Before teriyaki, everything became ubiquitous. Honey garlic chicken brought sweet, savory, Asian-inspired flavors to American dinner tables via the trusty crock-pot. This recipe emerged in the 1980s when Americans started experimenting with soy sauce beyond Chinese takeout. You'd arrange chicken thighs in the slow cooker, whisk together honey, soy sauce, crushed garlic, and a splash of rice vinegar. Pour it over the chicken, then let it cook for 4 to 6 hours. The honey caramelized slightly against the ceramic, creating sticky pockets of sweet, salty perfection. The garlic mellowed during long cooking, losing its sharp bite while still permeating every fiber of the chicken. The soy sauce provided that umami depth that made you want seconds. The sauce reduced and thickened into a glaze that clung to the chicken and made white rice absolutely mandatory. This was cultural fusion before fusion became fashionable. Middle America's interpretation of Asian flavors, created with ingredients from the regular grocery store. It wasn't authentic Chinese or Japanese, but it didn't try to be. Stuffed peppers. The oven-baked classic got a crock-pot makeover, solving the eternal problem of peppers that were either mushy or undercooked, never quite right. Stuffed peppers presented a timing nightmare in conventional cooking. Get the pepper perfect, and the filling was raw. Cook the filling through and the pepper disintegrated. The crock-pot solved this Goldilocks problem in the 1970s through gentle, even heat. You'd core bell peppers, stuff them with a mixture of ground beef, cooked rice, onions, tomato sauce, and Italian seasonings. Stand them upright in the slow cooker, pour extra tomato sauce around the base, and cook for 6 to 8 hours. The peppers softened perfectly while maintaining their shape. The filling cooked through without drying out, and that tomato sauce reduced into a thick, tangy pool at the bottom. The pepper flavor infused into the meat and rice, while beef juices enriched the pepper. This proved the crock-pot could handle delicate cooking, not just meat and potatoes basics. Split pea soup with ham. This overlooked legume found its moment in the slow cooker, where hours of gentle heat transformed dried peas into creamy, luxurious soup without any cream at all. Split peas became crock-pot stars in the late 1970s, when inflation made ham expensive, but ham hocks remained cheap. You'd throw split peas directly into the slow cooker, no soaking required, with a meaty ham hock, diced carrots, celery, onions, bay leaves, and chicken or ham broth. 10 hours later, those peas completely broke down, creating naturally thick, almost creamy soup through nothing but patient cooking and starches released from the peas themselves. The ham hock contributed smoky, salty depth, while meat fell off the bone in tender shreds. You'd fish out the bay leaves and bone, adjust seasoning, and serve something that tasted like hours of skilled cooking, but required 15 minutes of actual work. This was Depression-era food wisdom meeting 1970s technology, stretching cheap ingredients into meals that tasted expensive. Mississippi pot roast. This late 1990s viral recipe became the Crock-Pot's last gasp of glory before the internet age, proving sometimes the weirdest combinations create the most addictive results. Robin Chapman from Ripley, Mississippi, invented this recipe in the early 2000s, but it didn't explode until mid-2000s food blogs discovered it. The ingredient list sounded insane: chuck roast, ranch dressing mix, au jus gravy mix, butter, and pepperoncini peppers. You'd place the roast in the crock pot, sprinkle both packets over it, add a stick of butter on top, arrange the pepperoncini around it, and cook for 8 hours. The result was beef so tender, it fell apart at eye contact, swimming in tangy, peppery, slightly spicy, unbelievably savory gravy that defied explanation. The ranch and au jus packets combined into something greater than their parts. The butter added richness, and those pepperoncini provided acidic brightness, cutting through all that beef fat. This was the Crock-Pot's final middle finger to food snobbery, a recipe so weird, so processed, so impossible to justify that it became legendary specifically because it tasted incredible. Boiled calf's head, the Depression-era butcher's bargain that modern eaters can't stomach. From the 1920s through the 1940s, particularly during the Great Depression and wartime rationing, butchers sold calf's heads for pennies because most Americans had suddenly become squeamish about offal. Your great-grandmother knew that a single calf's head could feed 6 people for 2 meals. She'd simmer it for hours with onions, carrots, celery, and bay leaves until the meat fell tender from the bone, and the broth turned thick and golden with dissolved collagen. The cheek meat was considered the delicacy, buttery, tender, and more flavorful than any steak. The tongue got sliced thin for sandwiches. Even the brain was scrambled with eggs for breakfast. Wealthy European immigrants and farm families ate this regularly, while city folks gradually abandoned it as prosperity returned after World War II. Today's bone broth trend is basically this dish's watered-down grandchild. Beef, osso buco. Italian grandmothers brought Milan to American dinner tables. Then their grandchildren forgot the recipe existed. From the 1920s through the 1950s, Italian immigrant communities in New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago made this Milanese specialty a winter staple. They'd buy cross-cut veal or beef shanks with the marrow bone intact for almost nothing, since most Americans didn't know what to do with them. The shanks got browned in olive oil, then braised for hours in white wine, tomato, carrots, celery, and onion until the meat turned spoon tender and the marrow in the center melted into buttery richness. The real magic happened when Grandma served it with gremolata, fresh parsley, lemon zest, and garlic chopped fine and sprinkled on top just before eating. You'd dig out that marrow with a tiny spoon and spread it on bread like the world's most luxurious butter. By the 1970s, this became fancy restaurant food and disappeared from home kitchens entirely. Grandma's curried sausages. The British Commonwealth brought this humble curry to American tables during the Depression. Then, it vanished without a trace. From the 1930s through the 1950s, families with British, Australian, or Canadian roots made this economical dish that stretched cheap sausages into a full meal. Grandma would brown pork or beef sausages in a cast iron skillet, remove them, then make a roux with butter and flour in the sausage drippings. She'd add curry powder, usually the mild Madras kind that came in a tin, along with diced onions, sometimes a chopped apple for sweetness, and beef stock to create a thick, golden sauce. The sausages went back in to simmer until the curry mellowed and the flavors married together. She'd serve it over white rice or with thick slices of white bread to soak up the sauce. Kids loved it because the curry was gentle enough not to scare them, but flavorful enough to make cheap sausages taste exotic. It disappeared when convenience foods and takeout curry became available. King Ranch Chicken. Texas ranch wives created this layered casserole during the Depression to stretch one chicken across multiple meals. From the 1930s through the 1960s, this became a staple at church potlucks, funeral dinners, and Sunday suppers across Texas and the Southwest. Grandma would poach or roast a whole chicken, pull the meat off the bones, then layer it in a baking dish with torn corn tortillas, diced tomatoes with green chilies, onions, and a creamy sauce made from chicken stock, cream of mushroom soup, and melted cheese, usually Velveeta or American cheese. She'd bake it until it bubbled and browned on top, creating layers of flavor that tasted richer than the simple ingredients suggested. The tortillas on the bottom turned soft and soaked up all the sauce, while the ones on top got crispy at the edges. It fed 8 people for less than $1 and tasted like comfort itself. Modern versions pale in comparison because Grandma used real chicken stock from bones, not canned broth. Mexican egg casserole. Border state grandmothers turned breakfast into dinner with this economical egg dish that fed families for pennies. During the Depression and into the 1950s, eggs were cheap protein, and this casserole stretched a dozen eggs to feed 8 people. Grandma would layer torn corn tortillas in a buttered baking dish, then pour over beaten eggs mixed with milk, diced green chilies, onions, tomatoes, and shredded cheese. Sometimes, she'd add leftover beans or chorizo if the family had them. The whole thing baked until puffy and golden, with crispy edges and a creamy center that tasted like a cross between chilaquiles and a quiche. She'd serve it with salsa, sour cream, and refried beans on the side. Mexican-American families ate this for Sunday breakfast dinner, and it appeared at every church, social, and community gathering. The dish required no expensive ingredients, used up stale tortillas, and tasted like home. It faded as frozen breakfast burritos, and fast food breakfast became easier options in the 1980s. Lasagna bolognese. Northern Italian grandmothers brought this refined version to America. Then, it got buried under ricotta and mozzarella. From the 1930s through the 1960s, Italian families in cities like Cleveland, Detroit, and Chicago made authentic lasagna bolognese, the way it was done in Bologna, with layers of fresh pasta, slow-cooked meat ragu, creamy bechamel sauce, and just a hint of Parmigiano Reggiano cheese. No ricotta, no mozzarella, no thick layers of cheese that turned rubbery. Grandma would spend Saturday making the ragu, browning ground beef, pork, and veal with pancetta, then simmering it for hours with tomato paste, wine, and milk. Sunday morning, she'd make fresh egg pasta sheets and bechamel sauce, then carefully layer pasta, ragu, bechamel, and cheese, never more than 6 layers total. It baked until golden and bubbling, and each slice held together perfectly, revealing distinct layers of sauce and pasta. The taste was elegant, refined, almost delicate compared to the heavy American versions that came later. This real lasagna disappeared as Italian-American cuisine evolved into its own distinct thing.